What really happens when your husband hands you divorce papers after a night you swore was just work? Can one lie, told to cover up an affair, destroy a marriage, a family, and your own sense of reality? This is the story of how I watched everything unravel the moment he showed me the evidence. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The divorce papers hit the kitchen table with a sound that seemed to echo through our entire apartment. My husband Eliot's calm voice cut through the silence like a blade. "I know exactly where you were that night, Seraphina. I have proof." The manila envelope beside the papers was thick with evidence I never thought he'd find. As I stared at the documents that would end our 7-year marriage, I realized my web of lies had finally collapsed around me. The fluorescent light in our small kitchen cast harsh shadows across Eliot's face as he looked up from his laptop. His dark hair was disheveled from running his fingers through it, a habit he'd developed during our recent arguments. I could feel his eyes following me as I moved around our cramped apartment, gathering my purse and checking my appearance in the hallway mirror. "Working late again?" His voice carried that familiar edge of suspicion that had become so common between us lately. I forced myself to meet his gaze, practicing the lie I'd rehearsed all afternoon. "Yeah, unfortunately, we're swamped with the quarterly reports, and Janet asked me to cover the evening shift. You know how it is." The words came out smoothly, almost naturally. I'd gotten good at this over the past few months. Eliot's fingers paused over his keyboard. As an IT analyst, he was methodical about everything, always checking and double-checking details. It was a quality I'd once found endearing, but now it felt suffocating. "That's the 3rd time this month, Sarah. Maybe you should talk to your manager about the workload." I grabbed my jacket from the hook by the door, avoiding his concerned expression. "It's fine, Eliot. Some of us can't just work from home in our pajamas all day." The jab was unnecessary, but I needed him to back off. "Don't wait up for me." From the living room, I heard our 7-year-old daughter Mila's voice calling out, "Mummy, are you going to another party?" The innocent question made my stomach clench. Children always seem to hear more than they should. "It's not a party, sweetheart. Mummy has to work." I forced brightness into my voice, but Eliot was already walking toward Mila's room, his expression darkening. "Party?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "She's confused," I said quickly. "You know how kids mix things up. I told her I was going to a work meeting, and she probably thought I said party." The explanation sounded weak even to my own ears, but I was already running late. My phone buzzed with a text from Ronan. "Can't wait to see you tonight. The band's going to be amazing." I quickly turned the screen away from Eliot's line of sight and deleted the message. "I really have to go," I said, moving toward the door. "Kiss Mila goodnight for me." Eliot stood in the hallway, his arms crossed over his chest. He was wearing the old college t-shirt I'd bought him years ago, back when we were happy, back when I thought he was enough. "Sarah, we need to talk about what's been happening between us. This distance, these late nights." "Not now, Eliot. I'm already late, and Janet will be furious if I don't show up." I opened the door, desperate to escape his probing questions. "We can talk tomorrow." "When? You're never here anymore." The accusation stung because it was true, but instead of guilt, I felt anger. Maybe if you made an effort to be more interesting, I wouldn't need to find fulfillment elsewhere. The words were out before I could stop them, and I saw him flinch. Fulfillment elsewhere. His voice was quiet, dangerous. "What's that supposed to mean?" I realized my mistake immediately. "Work fulfillment, Eliot. Career satisfaction. Not everything is about you." I stepped into the hallway, pulling the door closed behind me. "I'll see you later." As I waited for the elevator, I could hear Mila asking Eliot why Mommy seemed angry all the time. His patient, gentle response made something twist in my chest, but I pushed the feeling away. I deserved happiness. I deserved excitement. I deserved more than a quiet life with a man who preferred debugging code to having real conversations. My sister Lillian had texted me earlier. "You deserve some fun, Syrah. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for taking care of yourself." She understood what it was like to feel trapped, to feel like life was passing you by while you played the role of dutiful wife and mother. The elevator arrived, and I checked my reflection in the polished steel doors. At 32, I still looked good. I'd been working out more, paying attention to my appearance again. Ronan had noticed. He made me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Eliot. "Be safe. Love you." I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Love you too." It wasn't entirely a lie. I did love him, in the comfortable, familiar way you love an old sweater. But love wasn't always enough, was it? As the elevator descended, I felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. Tonight would be different. Tonight, I would be Seraphina, not just Eliot's wife or Mila's mother. I would be myself, free and alive and wanted. I had no idea that Eliot was already at his computer, quietly checking my work schedule online. The company portal showed no evening shifts scheduled for customer service supervisors that week. He stared at the screen for a long time, then opened a new document and began typing notes with timestamps. The cinder room was exactly the kind of place I'd avoided during my married years. Dimly lit, filled with cigarette smoke and the sound of live music that was just a little too loud. But tonight, it felt like freedom. Ronan was waiting for me at the bar, his guitar case propped against his stool, his dark hair falling across his forehead in that careless way that made my heart race. "There she is," he said, standing to pull me into a hug that lasted just a moment longer than it should have. "I was starting to think you'd changed your mind." "Never," I said, breathing in his scent of cologne and something indefinably masculine. "Just had to deal with some domestic drama first." He ordered me a drink, something fruity and strong that I never would have chosen for myself. "Husband giving you trouble again?" I settled onto the bar stool beside him, conscious of how the short skirt I'd changed into in the parking garage rode up my thighs. "He's just so predictable. Every day is exactly the same with him. Work, dinner, television, bed. Rinse and repeat." "Life's too short for boring," Ronan said, his hand brushing against mine as he reached for his beer. "You deserve someone who appreciates your spirit." The validation felt like warm honey in my veins. This was what I'd been missing, someone who saw me as exciting, as worth pursuing. With Eliot, I felt invisible most of the time, just another piece of furniture in our carefully ordered life. Ronan's bandmates arrived around 9, a collection of musicians in their 20s and 30s who treated life like an adventure. They welcomed me into their circle with easy smiles and casual acceptance, though I caught a few meaningful glances exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. "So you're the married lady Ronan's been telling us about," said Jake, the drummer, with a grin that was equal parts friendly and mischievous. "He says you're thinking about making some changes in your life." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "I'm exploring my options," I said, trying to sound sophisticated rather than desperate. "Good for you," said Melissa, the bass player, raising her glass in a mock toast. "Life's too short to settle for less than you deserve." As the evening progressed, I found myself relaxing in ways I hadn't in years. The conversation flowed from music to travel to dreams we'd abandoned for responsible adult lives. Ronan kept my glass full, and his attention focused on me, making me feel like the most fascinating woman in the room. Around 11, I excused myself to the bathroom and quickly took a selfie in the mirror. The lighting was dim and flattering, and I looked happy in a way I hadn't in months. I posted it to social media with the caption, "Late-night work meeting. Sometimes you have to put in the extra hours. Dedication, flourish, work life." I also sent Eliot a text. "Still swamped with paperwork. This is taking forever. Don't wait up." His response came immediately. "Everything okay? You seem stressed lately." I stared at the message, feeling a flicker of the guilt I'd been suppressing all evening. But then Ronan's laughter drifted in from the main room, and I pushed the feeling away. Just tired. These late shifts are killing me. See you in the morning. Back at our table, the band was discussing their upcoming gig at a festival in Austin. You should come with us, Ronan said, his hand finding mine under the table. It's going to be an incredible weekend. I can't just disappear for a weekend, I protested, but the idea sent a thrill through me. I have responsibilities. Do you, though? Melissa asked, leaning forward with the intensity of someone who'd had several drinks. Or do you just think you do because that's what everyone expects? The question hit deeper than I wanted to admit. When was the last time I'd done something purely for myself? When was the last time I'd felt this alive, this desired? Think about it, Ronan said softly, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. Life is happening right now, Sarah. Don't let it pass you by. By the time last call was announced, I was drunk on more than just alcohol. I was intoxicated by possibility, by the feeling of being wanted and appreciated. When Ronan suggested I come back to his apartment, I barely hesitated. I should go home, I said, but without conviction. Should, he repeated, standing and extending his hand to me. There's that word again. When are you going to start doing what you want instead of what you should? His apartment was a studio in an old building downtown, filled with musical equipment and the organized chaos of a creative life. It was everything my carefully maintained home wasn't: spontaneous, artistic, alive with possibility. We talked until dawn, sharing stories and dreams over cheap wine and the kind of intimate conversation I hadn't had in years. When I finally fell asleep on his couch, I felt more like myself than I had in months. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the sound of my phone buzzing incessantly. 15 missed calls from Eliot. My heart hammered as I checked the time, 8:30 a.m. Mila would be getting ready for school, and Eliot would be wondering where I was. I quickly gathered my things, panic replacing the warm contentment I'd felt upon waking. I have to go, I told Ronan, who was making coffee in his tiny kitchen. Already? I was hoping we could grab breakfast. I can't. My family, they'll be worried. I was already at the door, my mind racing through possible explanations. Text me later, he called as I hurried down the stairs. Last night was amazing. In my car, I deleted all the text messages between Ronan and me from the past week. I couldn't risk Eliot seeing them if he asked to use my phone. Then I drove home, practicing my story about falling asleep at the office after working so late. I had no idea that Eliot had already called my workplace that morning, asking to speak to me about a family emergency, only to be told that no customer service supervisors had worked the previous evening. The apartment was unnaturally quiet when I slipped through the front door. Usually, mornings were chaotic with Mila getting ready for school and Eliot preparing for his workday. But today, I found them both sitting at the kitchen table, Mila picking at a bowl of cereal, while Eliot stared at his coffee mug. "Mommy!" Mila jumped up and ran to hug me, but her embrace felt tentative, uncertain. "Where were you? Daddy said you had to work all night." "That's right, sweetheart. Mommy had to stay very late at the office." I smoothed her hair, avoiding Eliot's gaze. "Sometimes grown-ups have to do things they don't want to do." "But why didn't you come home to sleep?" Her innocent question made my chest tighten. "I fell asleep at my desk," I said quickly. "It happens sometimes when you're very tired." Eliot finally looked up, and I was startled by the exhaustion in his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. "Mila, go brush your teeth. The school bus will be here soon." She hesitated, looking between us with the intuitive awareness that children have for adult tension. "Are you and Daddy fighting again?" "No, baby. We're just tired." I forced a smile. "Go get ready for school." After she left the room, Eliot and I sat in silence. He was still in the clothes he'd worn the day before, and I realized he'd probably stayed up all night, waiting for me to come home. Rough night at the office? He asked finally, his voice carefully neutral. Brutal. Janet had us working on the Morrison account until nearly 3 a.m. The lie came easily, built on a foundation of half-truths and misdirection I'd been constructing for weeks. That's strange, he said, taking a slow sip of his coffee. I called your office around 9:30 last night. I was worried when you didn't answer your phone. They said no customer service supervisors were scheduled for evening shifts this week. My blood turned to ice, but I forced myself to remain calm. They must have been confused. It was a last-minute thing. Janet called people in for an emergency project. You know how these big clients can be. Eliot nodded slowly, but his eyes never left my face. I also tried calling Janet's direct line. It went straight to voicemail. She was probably swamped too. I moved to the coffee maker, needing something to do with my hands. Why were you calling the office anyway? Don't you trust me? The deflection worked. I saw him flinch slightly, the way he always did when I accused him of being controlling or suspicious. It was a weakness I'd learned to exploit over the years. Of course I trust you, he said quietly. I was just worried. You seemed different when you left last night. Angry. I wasn't angry, I was stressed about work. I poured coffee into a mug, my hand surprisingly steady. Maybe if you were more supportive, instead of interrogating me every time I have to work late, I wouldn't seem so defensive. Sarah, I'm not interrogating you. I'm trying to understand what's happening with us. You've been distant for months. You barely talk to me anymore. And when you do, it's like you're looking for reasons to be upset. The accusation stung because it was partially true, but I couldn't admit that without admitting everything else. Maybe I'm distant because you've become boring, Eliot. When was the last time you surprised me? When was the last time you made me feel like a woman, instead of just a roommate who shares your bed? He recoiled as if I'd slapped him. I didn't know you felt that way. How could you know? You never ask. You just assume everything is fine as long as the bills are paid and Mila is taken care of. I was working myself into righteous anger now, using his hurt as fuel for my own defensive fire. I have needs too, you know. I have dreams and desires that go beyond this little domestic bubble we've created. What kind of dreams? He asked softly. Maybe we could... It's too late for that, I snapped, then immediately regretted the words. They revealed too much, implied too much. I mean, it's too late to discuss this now. I need to shower and get ready for work. As I headed toward the bathroom, I heard him call after me. Sarah, I love you. Whatever's going on, whatever you need, we can figure it out together. I closed the bathroom door without responding, leaning against it as tears I didn't understand began to fall. Why did his kindness feel like a trap? Why did his love feel like a burden? My phone buzzed with a text from Ronan. Missing you already. Last night was perfect. I quickly deleted the message, but not before feeling a flutter of excitement that chased away the guilt. This was what I needed. Someone who made me feel alive, who saw me as more than just a wife and mother. By the time I emerged from the shower, Eliot had left for work, and Mila was waiting by the door with her backpack. She looked small and worried, older than her 7 years. Mummy, are you sad? She asked as I walked her to the bus stop. No, sweetheart. Why would you think that? You and Daddy whisper a lot now, and you cry sometimes when you think I'm not looking. The observation hit me like a physical blow. I knelt down to her level, smoothing her dark hair away from her face. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings, but that doesn't mean anything is wrong. Daddy and I both love you very much. Do you love each other? The question hung in the air between us as the school bus rounded the corner. I kissed her forehead instead of answering, watching as she climbed the steps and found her usual seat by the window. She waved at me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Walking back to the apartment, I tried to shake off the lingering guilt from our conversation. Children were resilient. Mila would be fine. I deserved happiness too, didn't I? My phone rang as I reached our building. It was my sister Lillian. How was your night out? She asked without preamble. You looked amazing in that photo you posted. It was exactly what I needed, I said, grateful for her support. I felt like myself again for the first time in months. Good for you. Don't let Eliot make you feel guilty about having a life outside of your marriage. You give so much to everyone else. You deserve to do something just for you. He's already asking questions, I admitted. He called my work looking for me. Controlling much? Lillian's voice was sharp with disapproval. That's exactly the kind of behavior that drives women away. He should be supporting your career, not checking up on you like you're a child. Her words reinforced what I'd been telling myself for months. I wasn't the problem here. Eliot's possessiveness was. His inability to trust me, to give me the space I needed to grow and explore who I was becoming. You're right, I said, feeling better already. I'm not doing anything wrong by having friends and interests outside of my marriage. Exactly. And if you can't handle that, maybe it's time to consider whether this marriage is really serving you anymore. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, thinking about her words. Was I really happy? Or was I just comfortable, settling for a life that was safe but ultimately unfulfilling? My phone buzzed with another message from Ronan. Thinking about Austin, the invitation still stands if you're feeling adventurous. This time, I didn't delete the message immediately. Instead, I stared at it, imagining myself in a different city, living a different life, being the kind of woman who said yes to adventure instead of always choosing responsibility. I had no idea that Eliot was at his office, creating a detailed timeline of my story's inconsistencies. He'd already spoken to Janet, who confirmed that no emergency projects had been scheduled for the previous evening. He was methodical in his approach, documenting everything with the same careful attention to detail he brought to debugging complex code. The web of lies I'd constructed was already beginning to unravel, but I was too intoxicated by the possibility of a different life to notice the threads pulling loose around me. Sunday lunch at Morelli's had been a family tradition for years. The Italian restaurant was loud and warm, filled with families like ours who gathered around red-checkered tablecloths to share pasta and conversation. But today, the familiar setting felt like a stage where my carefully constructed lies would be put to the ultimate test. Eliot's mother, Helen, had insisted on joining us, claiming she wanted to spend time with Mila. But I could see the suspicion in her sharp blue eyes as she studied my face across the table. Helen had never particularly liked me, though she'd been civil for Eliot's sake. Lately, though, her disapproval had become more obvious. "You look tired, Seraphina," she said, cutting Mila's chicken into precise pieces. "These late work nights must be taking a toll." "I'm fine," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just busy with a big project at work." "What kind of project keeps customer service supervisors out until dawn?" Helen's voice was deceptively casual, but I could hear the trap being set. Eliot shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mom, let's just enjoy lunch." "I'm just concerned about my daughter-in-law," Helen said sweetly, "and my granddaughter, who mentioned that Mommy goes to a lot of parties lately." Mila looked up from her coloring book, confusion clouding her features. "I said Mommy goes to work meetings that sound like parties because there's music." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Honey, there's no music at Mommy's work meetings. Maybe you heard something on TV?" "But you told me." "Mila, why don't you show Grandma the picture you colored?" Eliot interrupted gently, but I could see the questions building behind his eyes. The conversation was mercifully interrupted by the arrival of our food, but the tension around the table was thick enough to cut. My father Martin sat quietly at the end, methodically eating his spaghetti and avoiding eye contact with anyone. He'd perfected the art of staying neutral in family conflicts, a skill he'd honed during my mother's illness and after her death. I was halfway through my chicken parmesan when I saw him. Ronan walked through the restaurant's front door, his guitar case slung over his shoulder, and that confident smile I'd fallen for lighting up his face. My blood turned to ice as his eyes scanned the dining room and landed on our table. "Sarah," he called out, weaving between tables toward us. What a surprise! I felt every eye at our table turn to me as Ronan approached. There was no way to avoid this, no graceful exit strategy. I could only sit frozen as my two worlds collided in the most public way possible. "Hi, Ronan," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "Meeting the guys for lunch before our gig tonight." He grinned at my family, completely oblivious to the tension he'd walked into. "You must be Sarah's family. I'm Ronan Chase. I work with Sarah." The lie came so naturally from his lips that I almost believed it myself. But Helen's eyes narrowed dangerously, and I saw Eliot's jaw tighten. "Work with her how?" Helen asked, her voice sharp as a blade. "We're in the same project group," Ronan said, glancing at me for confirmation. "Sarah's been telling me all about her family. You must be the husband, Eliot, right?" "Eliot," my husband corrected quietly. "And you work in customer service too?" I watched in horror as Ronan's confident expression faltered slightly. "Oh, well, not exactly customer service. We're more on the creative side of things." "Creative side?" Helen leaned forward like a predator sensing weakness. "I wasn't aware Sarah's company had a creative department." "Mum," Eliot warned, but she ignored him. Ronan laughed nervously, finally picking up on the hostile undercurrents. "You know how it is in corporate environments, lots of cross-departmental collaboration." "Ronan, didn't you say you had to meet your bandmates?" I interjected desperately. "You shouldn't keep them waiting." "Right, the band." He grinned again, seemingly relieved to be on familiar ground. "We had such a wild night on Friday. Sarah was amazing. She really knows how to let loose when she's not stuck behind a desk." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I felt the color drain from my face as the implications sank in around the table. Helen's mouth fell open in shock, while Eliot went very still beside me. "Friday night?" Helen's voice was deadly quiet. "You mean the night Sarah was working late at the office?" Ronan's eyes widened as he finally understood what he'd walked into. "Oh, I meant—" "What exactly happened Friday night?" Eliot asked, his voice controlled but dangerous. "Nothing," I said quickly. "Ronan's confused. We barely know each other." But Ronan, in his panic, made everything worse. "Come on, Sarah, don't be modest. You were the life of the party. Everyone at the Cinder Room was talking about how you could dance." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade as my family processed what they'd just heard. Mila looked between the adults with growing alarm, sensing the shift in atmosphere, even if she didn't understand the cause. "The Cinder Room," Helen repeated slowly. "That's the bar downtown, isn't it? Not an office." "I should go," Ronan said, backing away from the table. "Nice meeting everyone." He fled toward the back of the restaurant, leaving me to face the wreckage he'd created. I could feel other diners staring at our table, drawn by the obvious tension and raised voices. "Sarah," Eliot said quietly, "would you like to explain what just happened?" "He's confused," I insisted, my voice rising with desperation. "He obviously has me mixed up with someone else. You know how men are. They see one blonde woman and think we're all the same." "He knew your name," Helen said coldly. "He knew you have a family. He knew exactly who you were." "Mummy, why is everyone angry?" Mila's small voice cut through the tension, reminding us all that we had an audience for this disaster. "Nobody's angry, sweetheart," I said, reaching for her hand. But she pulled away, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "I want to go home," she whispered. Helen stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "That's an excellent idea. Mila, would you like to come to Grandma's house for a while? We can make cookies and watch movies." "Can Mommy and Daddy come too?" Mila asked hopefully. Helen's eyes never left my face as she answered, "I think Mommy and Daddy need to have a grown-up conversation first." As Helen gathered Mila's things, I saw her lean down to whisper something in Eliot's ear. Whatever she said made his expression harden even further. Then she was gone, taking my daughter with her and leaving me alone with my husband and father. Martin finally looked up from his plate, his weathered face sad but unsurprised. "I think I'll head home too," he said quietly. "Seraphina, I hope you know what you're doing." After he left, Eliot and I sat in silence for several long minutes. The restaurant continued to buzz around us, but I felt isolated in a bubble of shame and panic. "Sarah," Eliot said finally, "I'm going to ask you one more time, and I need you to tell me the truth. Where were you Friday night?" I looked into his eyes, the same warm brown eyes that had looked at me with such love on our wedding day. And I lied one more time. "I was at work. That man is obviously unstable. Maybe he's been stalking me or something. You should be concerned about my safety instead of interrogating me like I'm a criminal." Eliot nodded slowly, then pulled out his phone. "You're right," he said. "If someone is stalking you, we should probably call the police. I'm sure they'll want to investigate. They might want to check security cameras at your office building, verify your story." The threat was clear, and we both knew it. I stared at him, seeing a hardness in his expression that I'd never noticed before. This wasn't the gentle, trusting man I'd married. This was someone who'd been pushed too far and was finally pushing back. "You don't need to involve the police," I said carefully. "I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding." "I'm sure it was," he agreed, but his finger was already moving across his phone screen. "I'm just going to make sure we have a record of this conversation, in case we need it later." It wasn't until we were walking to the car that I realized he'd been recording our entire exchange. The careful, methodical man I'd found so boring had just outmaneuvered me completely, and I hadn't even seen it coming. Monday morning at work felt like walking into a minefield. The open-plan office that had always buzzed with friendly chatter seemed different now, filled with whispered conversations that stopped when I approached and meaningful glances exchanged behind my back. I'd barely settled at my desk when my supervisor Janet appeared beside me, her expression carefully neutral. "Seraphina, could I see you in my office for a moment?" My stomach dropped, but I followed her to the glass-walled office that overlooked the customer service floor. Janet closed the door and gestured for me to sit, her movements precise and professional. "I had an interesting phone call over the weekend," she began, settling behind her desk. "From your husband. He was looking for you Friday night, said there was a family emergency." I forced my expression to remain calm. "Yes, he told me he called." I explained that it was a last-minute project. "Seraphina," Janet interrupted gently, "there was no last-minute project Friday night. No one from customer service worked late that evening. I checked the logs myself." The lie crumbled in my mouth before I could speak it. Janet's kind but firm expression told me she already knew the truth, or at least enough of it to matter. "I can explain," I began, but she held up a hand. "I don't need you to explain your personal life to me, but I do need you to understand that using work as a cover story for your personal activities puts both of us in an uncomfortable position. If your husband decides to involve HR or upper management," the implication hung in the air between us. My job, my reputation, my financial independence, all of it could disappear if this situation escalated further. "It won't happen again," I said quietly. "I hope not. You're a good employee, Seraphina, but I can't protect you if this becomes a pattern." Janet's expression softened slightly. "Is everything okay at home? If you need to talk to someone, HR has counseling resources available." The offer of help felt like salt in an open wound. I wanted to scream that I didn't need counseling, that I needed excitement and passion, and someone who saw me as more than just a reliable worker bee. Instead, I nodded and mumbled something about marriage being complicated. Back at my desk, I tried to focus on my work, but concentration was impossible. Every phone call felt like an interrogation. Every email seemed to carry hidden meanings. By lunchtime, I was desperate for some kind of normalcy. I found refuge in the break room with my colleague Sandra, who had always been friendly and non-judgmental. But even she seemed different today, more reserved than usual. "Everything okay?" I asked, settling beside her with my salad. Sandra glanced around the break room, then leaned closer. Sarah, I probably shouldn't say anything, but people are talking. My blood chilled. Talking about what? About Friday night, about you being seen at the Cinder Room with some guy. Maria's cousin works there as a bartender, and she said you were all over each other. The bite of salad turned to ash in my mouth. That's ridiculous. People love to gossip about things they don't understand. I'm not judging, Sandra said quickly, but maybe you should be more careful. You know how fast rumors spread around here, and with your husband calling the office. She didn't need to finish the thought. In a company this size, everyone knew everyone's business. By the end of the week, the story would have spread to every department, growing more salacious with each retelling. I spent the rest of my lunch break in the parking garage, calling Lillian for moral support. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright with sisterly concern. How are you holding up? She asked immediately. You sounded pretty shaken yesterday. It's getting worse, I admitted, leaning against my car. People at work are talking. Eliot's asking questions I can't answer. And his mother is acting like I'm some kind of criminal. Helen never liked you anyway, Lillian said dismissively. She's probably thrilled to have something to hold against you. And as for work gossip, who cares? You're not the first person to have a social life outside of marriage. Her support felt like a lifeline, but even she couldn't erase the growing sense that my carefully constructed world was falling apart. What if Eliot finds out the truth? Then you deal with it. Sarah, you're not happy in this marriage. Everyone can see it. Maybe this is the universe's way of forcing you to make a change you've been too scared to make on your own. But Mila, we'll be fine. Kids are resilient, and she'll be better off with parents who are honest about their feelings than with parents who stay together out of obligation. After we hung up, I sat in my car for several more minutes, trying to summon the courage to go back inside. Lillian's words echoed in my head. Maybe this was the universe pushing me toward a change I needed to make. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my social media, looking for some kind of distraction. But even there, I found reminders of my crumbling situation. Helen had posted several photos of Mila from their weekend together, with captions about quality time with my precious granddaughter that felt like passive-aggressive commentary on my parenting. Worse, I noticed that several of Eliot's friends had liked and commented on the posts, people who had always been friendly to me in the past. The social dynamics were shifting, alliances being drawn, and I could feel myself being isolated. In a moment of defiance, I posted my own photo, a selfie from that morning, with the caption, "Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who understand you least. Grateful for friends who see the real me." Authenticity, niche growth, new chapter. The response was immediate. Lillian liked it within minutes, along with a few work friends and some acquaintances from college. But I also noticed who didn't respond. Mutual friends of Eliot and mine, neighbors, people from Mila's school community. The silence felt louder than any criticism. My phone buzzed with a text from Ronan. "Hey, sorry about yesterday. Didn't realize I was walking into a family thing. You okay?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "It's complicated. Can we talk later?" "Of course. Want to meet for coffee after work? I know a quiet place." The invitation felt like a rope thrown to a drowning woman. "Yes, send me the address." As I walked back into the office building, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. I looked tired, stressed, older than my 32 years. But underneath the strain, I could still see the woman I used to be, the one who had dreams and ambitions beyond suburban domesticity. Maybe Lillian was right. Maybe this crisis was an opportunity in disguise, a chance to finally choose the life I wanted instead of the life I'd settled for. I had no idea that Eliot was spending his lunch break in a law office downtown, consulting with a divorce attorney about asset protection and custody arrangements. The methodical approach that had made him successful in his IT career was now being applied to the dissolution of our marriage, and he was building his case with the same careful attention to detail he brought to debugging complex systems. The evidence was mounting, but I was too focused on my own narrative of victimization and liberation to see the trap closing around me. The law office of Patterson and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a downtown high-rise, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city I'd lived in my entire adult life. But today, seated across from attorney Margaret Patterson, that familiar skyline looked foreign and threatening. Eliot sat beside his lawyer, a manila folder thick with documents spread open between them. He looked different than he had just a week ago, more confident, more decisive. The gentle, accommodating man I'd married had been replaced by someone I barely recognized. "Mrs. Vale," Margaret Patterson began, her voice professionally neutral, "we've asked you here today to discuss the dissolution of your marriage to Mr. Vale. I understand you don't have legal representation yet." I glanced at Eliot, hoping to see some softness in his expression, some sign that this was all a misunderstanding we could work through. Instead, I found cold determination. "I don't understand why we need lawyers," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "Can't we work this out ourselves, for Mila's sake?" "We tried that approach," Eliot said quietly, "but it requires honesty from both parties." Margaret opened the folder and pulled out a series of documents. "Mr. Vale has provided substantial evidence of marital misconduct, including documentation of false statements about your whereabouts and activities." She slid a photograph across the table, a printout of the social media post I'd made from the Cinder Room, time-stamped and geotagged. Next to it was a copy of the text messages I'd sent Eliot that same evening, claiming to be working late at the office. "This is harassment," I said, my voice rising with panic. "You can't use my private social media posts against me." "Actually, we can," Margaret replied calmly. "Social media posts are considered public record in divorce proceedings, especially when they contradict sworn statements about your activities." She continued pulling documents from the folder. Phone records showing calls to my office that were never answered, work schedules proving no overtime had been authorized, even security footage from my office building showing that I hadn't entered or exited on the night in question. "How did you get all this?" I demanded, staring at Eliot in disbelief. "I'm good at research," he said simply. "It's what I do for a living." The conference room was all glass and steel, cold as a morgue. Margaret Hale, Eliot's attorney, didn't bother with pleasantries. She simply opened the binder and let my life spill out in color-coded tabs. Bank charges from the Cinder Room highlighted in yellow. Hotel keycard logs from the night I swore I was at yoga. A 37-minute recording from Morelli's. My own voice, shrill and lying. Ronan's imagining things, Eliot's just paranoid. Screenshots of texts I'd deleted but iCloud hadn't. Eliot sat beside her, hands flat on the table, eyes on the evidence instead of me. "Primary custody to Mr. Vale," Margaret said, sliding the proposal across the polished wood. "Supervised visitation for you until a guardian ad litem confirms stability. Marital accounts frozen except for court-approved expenses. The house stays with Eliot and Mila." Supervised. The word punched the air out of me. "She's my daughter." "You taught her that lying is how adults solve problems," Eliot said, voice quiet, almost gentle. "I'm teaching her the opposite." Margaret clicked her pen. "We can do this quietly with your signature, or we can do it in open court with subpoenas for Ronan, your boss, and anyone else who watched you rewrite reality for the last 4 months. Your call." I looked for an angle, a plea, anything. There wasn't one. I signed. Next morning, the papers hit the courthouse. By lunch, the mom's group chat had exploded. Ronan had blocked my number, and Mila's teacher emailed, asking if everything was okay at home. I moved into a beige apartment that smelled like someone else's cigarettes. My first weekend visitation was 2 hours in a county office, while a social worker watched Mila color and ask why we couldn't just go to the park like normal. Ronan never showed for his deposition. Coward. Eliot never missed a pickup. 6 months later, I watched from my car as Mila ran across the playground into Eliot's arms, backpack bouncing, laughing like nothing had ever broken. I finally felt alive, the way you feel when you've lost everything and the pain is so sharp it's the only thing that still proves you're breathing. Turns out that's not living. That's just surviving the mess you made.